I'd like to introduce Dr. Bronwyn Wood, who is a senior lecturer in education at Victoria University of Wellington. Her research interests centre on issues relating to youth participation, citizenship and education. And she would hate me to say this, but I would say that she's probably the foremost writer in this area in New Zealand at the moment. So we are very lucky to have her here, and she is going to set the scene by trying to give us a global in the sense of ideas around global citizenship education, so that we can bounce all the other ideas that we hear from the other speakers. So thank you so much for giving up your time, Bronwyn. We are really looking forward to hearing you.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. Kia ora koutou. Lovely to be here tonight, and a real pleasure to be involved in this whole UNESCO discussion. I'm going to start with a bit of a personal story as a way to kick us into the issues tonight. And March 15 we'll return to as a date that we will probably never forget as New Zealand. I certainly won't. It started off with so much hope. This is part of my story here in Wellington, where I raced down to Civic Square that morning to join hundreds and hundreds of students who were preparing to strike for climate change and march the city. I was rushing and a bit late, so I took a shortcut through the library and popped out and saw the scene as I arrived of just hundreds and hundreds of young people. I couldn't help but have some tears in my eyes as I thought, how on earth can this generation be accused of being selfish, let alone apathetic, when you see this? And the day was simply a delightful occasion as we marched down to Parliament, and we saw children of all ages gathering together to signal that this generation wasn't going to tolerate the inaction of adults before. And we heard from students as young as 10 speaking about why this issue mattered to them. My own son, a 17-year-old, was involved, and after the march he came back with a group of friends to our house and put on some music and cooked up lunch together. Happily listening to them, I raced upstairs to meet a deadline for Carol for this UNESCO project, which was the March the 15th deadline, and I worked on it, finishing around about 2:30, and flicked this off to her. Really pleased to have had that all finished. Only a few minutes later, I got a text from my son at Canterbury University saying, "Mum, I'm in the university gym. They've locked us down. There seems to be a gunman on the street. Not sure what's happening, but we're not allowed out." And he was held there for 5 hours. My heart froze as I flicked on the news and saw this unfolding terror that afternoon of these incredibly racist killings in the Christchurch mosques. How could this be? A day that had started with so much hope, ended with so much horror. And yet, as we know, that wasn't and isn't the end. And as you know, the events unfolded with a feeling of disbelief and yet also hope. Collectively, as we said, this must not be what defines us. And I refer back to these events partly because of the way they were tied into the deadlines for this project, but mostly because the issues they represent for us are why we need to hold this conversation about global citizenship education today. What we know is that issues such as climate change and terrorism and many more do not only affect New Zealand, but in fact such issues transcend national borders and require solutions from collective groups of people across the world to work collectively together, because the nature of them is that they are far too complex for one group or one nation to solve through one policy or action. So global citizenship education in its broadest sense is the type of education that develops in students a global awareness, a sense of responsibility, and an ability to take action towards a more peaceful, just and inclusive and environmentally sustainable world. It is not a new idea. As long ago as the Greeks and Romans, they held the notion of citizens of the cosmopolites, whose role it was to create a more ordered and peaceful life as a result of one's position in life and the cosmos. Our word cosmopolitan comes directly from that notion. However, in recent times, global citizenship education has emerged as a very key idea. In fact, Lynn Parmenter, a New Zealander, says that 2/3 of the literature on global citizenship education has been published since the year 2000. So why is this? There are many reasons, but broadly we can see about 3 of them that have really driven this to be a central focus. Firstly, we can see a heightened awareness of the complexity and intractable nature of social, political and environmental issues. We are more aware of that than ever today. This is partly fueled by globalisation and the growth of internet and communication technologies. So these have heightened our flows of information and ideas around the world, and indeed heightened the movement of people through more cosmopolitan lifestyles, through migration, through tourism. So these all bring us a greater awareness of global issues. A third reason is the shift in policies that many countries of the Western world undertook around the 1990s, characterised by a retreat from government intervention and the positioning of citizens themselves with the role of resolving local and global issues. So these shifts have all contributed to a growth in interest in global citizenship education. However, it is a highly contested idea, and while many advocate for citizens who act on global, not only local levels, others question whether we actually have the capacity to act in jurisdictions beyond our own nation. Others have critiqued the rather soft approach to global citizenship education, which promotes fun, fasting and fundraising, as opposed to a more deeply critical structural critique of the global inequalities which underpin our world today, that link back to colonialism, resource inequalities, labour distribution, and so on. And as we will hear later from our panellists, there are often assumptions about whose knowledge counts in that process of globalisation that need to be critiqued as well. Global citizenship has very multiple and diverse expressions and interpretations, and a recent 2017 study found that it was almost impossible to draw together an idea that unified all of the ways it had been implemented, because people adapted it to their local needs a lot. So it does present some issues to us as educators. Here in New Zealand, we don't have a formal global citizenship education curriculum, but we do have many opportunities within our current curriculum to teach global citizenship. We have an openness within ideas, within subjects like social studies, geography, economics, and many others, to bring in these ideas, and especially the use of languages, to bring in many of these ideas into our classroom. But we do have a challenge within New Zealand that the openness of our curriculum means that a teacher can decide the context that they wish to study, even if there is a loose idea that they will study global responsibilities, for example. So it's very difficult to then assess what a student might know at the end of their schooling career about something like citizenship or global citizenship, because they've been exposed to many different ideas. This also makes it quite difficult to resource, because schools are doing so many different things. A comparative study between New Zealand and Japan concluded that while the ideas of holding an open curriculum held great potential for global citizenship, it was also difficult to establish what had been learnt by the end of it in New Zealand. In my own research, I have found that global approaches have often been reserved for high socioeconomic communities, and in smaller and poorer communities, they often get a local-only curriculum. So this is actually quite challenging, because the hidden message in that is that some people deserve a more global curriculum exposure than others. And some teachers have told me that their students are only interested in the local community, not the global. So there are some challenges as we look at these intersection of global and local ideas. I'm going to get muddled on those words. There are some wonderful new opportunities, and part of this is because the global has come to New Zealand, and we have some of the most multicultural school communities in the world in places like Auckland now. So my latest research, I've been talking to teachers about what it means to teach in multicultural environments, and what they have said, it's one of the most wonderful things is that our students are a living resource, and that we get people sitting in our classrooms now when we are teaching global issues that can actually tell us what it's like to live and walk in those places, even if we haven't been there. So there are some wonderful opportunities. So just to conclude, what do we need to do? It would be easy to assume that if we put a more global citizenship education ideas in the curriculum, it would get taught. But what we know from decades and decades of research is that what is in the curriculum doesn't mean that it will be taught well. I've had the privilege of researching our citizenship education curriculum in very many classrooms around New Zealand, and I'm staggered by the complexity that it involves for teachers, but there are some things that we know. A global citizenship education curriculum is powerful when it is engaging and knowledge-rich. It needs to take students from their current worlds to worlds that they do not know, and at the same time richly inform them with the ability to act in those worlds. When we study citizenship as a set of activities in the real world rather than an abstract idea, we find that students are far more engaged. When it involves real people in real places and issues of personal and social significance, we find that learning increases greatly. So to conclude, the issues which face us require citizenship competencies of people in all nations to collectively address. Our world is interconnected, and we need to prepare young people for such independence and diversity at all scales. Our task is urgent, but also a hopeful one, as we work to equip both students and teachers to play an active role in their local communities, as well as in an increasingly interconnected world. Thank you.